It is with great joy I share a little bit about Ashley Blount, our guest preacher this morning. Ashley is a community organizer, facilitator, and artist. She is currently working with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for Education, Equity, and as a deputy director with CT Corps. Organize Now, an organization that is dedicated to building an anti-racist community and to co-creating a movement for greater racial equality in the state of Connecticut. Ashley is a facilitator that loves to lead community conversations and currently partners with Recenter and Connecticut Equality around anti-bias and anti-racist practices. Working through oppression with love and grace has led Ashley to extend this work to immigration justice and a close affiliation with Hartford Deportation Defense. As an artist, she has also been able to add art to activism by hosting a BIPOC, which is Black Indigenous People of Color, drum circle, and other art activities in the community to promote civic engagement. Ashley believes that transformative practices lead to liberated spaces. Well, we have known Ashley for a while now. You may remember that she and Renee were here helping us as we decided to become a sanctuary church. That was just a year ago, December. And we stood with Ashley when we occupied the ICE offices on Main Street here in Hartford, protesting to free Taz. And Ashley has attended the Transgender Day of Remembrance. All this to say that Ashley is no stranger to MCC Hartford. In fact, she is a dear friend and colleague in the work for justice. Please join me now in welcoming Ashley to our pulpit.
All right, so I'm nervous. It's way different to come and speak about justice and organizing stuff, and there's a difference in then, relaying what God has given to me. So it's a difference in that. It makes me a little nervous, but we're going to do it anyway. So good morning.
Good morning.
It is an honor to be here in this space, to be amongst friends, and thanking God that a place like this even exists. I am a daughter of a pastor, which does not agree with my lifestyle and how I live my life, and understanding that so many of my LGBTQ siblings have lost faith, have been told that they are worthless, and on a slippery slope to the gates of hell. So a place like this, where folks can be affirmed and worship with one another, is a place that is precious. So just thank you for being here in this space. So with that being said, I've spoke at many places before in pulpits and been asked to speak, but I've never been able to do this. So I just want to acknowledge my partner who is here with me, who supports me, who loves me. That is also very important to do, and also feels really good to do that. So in the reading, we read about Esther, and I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with the story of Esther if you attended church in your lifetime. Esther has been spoken about. So just to give you some insight, a little more insight on Esther, the chapter before, it goes into Haman's plot to destroy the Jews. And Haman was so adamant on destroying the Jews that he offered to put money into the king's treasury to ensure that this took place. So I just want you to think about, because I am a community organizer, how do you respond when threats are made on your community? When they want to stop our trans youth from participating in sports?
Tell it.
When Black trans women are leaving this earth at alarming rates?
Speak on it.
When men of color are being murdered by the state from those who are supposed to be protecting us? When state passes policies that directly, negatively impact you and you love or tell you what bathroom you can use, what do you do? How do you move? The scripture we read this morning tells us that Mordecai responds to the decree of annihilation of his people by tearing his clothes and putting on sackcloth and ashes and going through the city, wailing loudly, all the way to the king's gate in protest. And no, Mordecai wasn't by himself. He was among other Jews. And does everybody know what sackcloth is? Yeah, he was wearing like nothing, shreds, going through the city. And these folks, you know, they were activists in their time. They fasted together, they laid out on the street together, disrupted the flow of the day, challenged the law. Some of this reminds me of how we slept outside of the ICE building for a week through a nor'easter in the cold on the ground in tents in front of the ICE building. We laid out in front of the king's gate. We made noise by chanting, singing, inviting community leaders to speak, used the blowhorn. We danced, we laughed, we cried, we stopped traffic, we spoke to strangers. To let Taz free, not one more. Deportation, not one more. Let our queer families be together. So come journey with me as we use an organizer's lens to take in this story of Esther. So organizing. Organizing is a combo of people and power. It's the uniting of folks who are leaders in their communities, activists who care, who are always willing to stand up for what is right, those who are willing to step with 10 toes on the ground and speaking truth to power. They work together to shift the power structures with intent to make, create, change for the greater good. It's just not a protest or a march or a sit-in or 7 days outside of the ICE building. This community coming together through alignment of an issue, which means meetings, planning, strategies, conference calls, long nights, early days, working lunches, panel discussions, community conversations. You can see I have a lot of experience in all these things. You know, it takes time and it takes alignment for us to be together. Going back to the scripture, outside in the king's court, the Jews were shouting, chanting, and protest, and Esther, the king, and the rest of the folks inside could hear. Esther got word that her uncle, which is Mordecai, was out there protesting. And one was probably concerned about her uncle, you know, like, what's good, Uncle Mordecai? Like, are you okay? You out there protesting? And two, I'm sure maybe somewhat embarrassed being the queen, having your family member outside in shreds, protesting loudly. And three, probably even nervous and fearful for his life, knowing that it was against the law to be in the king's court without proper clothing. Kind of reminds me of my mom, who was always concerned, who always checks in when there's a protest, who always checks in when someone else is murdered for protesting in the street, who when she seen Sandra Bland movie, cried calling, like that's what happens when you're out here in the streets, how family cares and wants to support you. So Esther had someone sent down, you know, with the best intentions, the proper clothes for him, not fully understanding the reason for his protesting. In response, the clothes were refused. There was something bigger at stake. Reminds me of how folks seen us on the news, on social media, and started to bring us food and water and flashlights and hand warmers, and even kept us company for a few hours. And then asked us, like, is today the last day? Are you ready to go home? Are you safe? Are you secure? They left with good intentions, but we understood that there was something greater at stake. With that understanding, back to scripture, Esther sent down Hatchite, which I'm not sure if I'm saying the name correctly, down to get the full story. And he spoke to Mordecai, in which then she learned about the fate of the Jews. And this is when the real organizing started. Mordecai made a shift. He came from activists outside protesting on the streets to then being a real community organizer. And Mordecai thought about Esther's place in the king's court and said, Esther, you have some power there. And I like to think that Mordecai did what we do in organizing world, a power map. So if you think about where Esther was and who she was in alignment. Not only was she a Jew, but she was in the king's palace. She had some power. And if we think about organizers, they work to build similar power. Organizers start by building relationships, how I came to meet Reverend Aaron. They know that in the world as it is, everyone acts in their own self-interest. So you have to find that commonality. You have to find that alignment. By tapping into folks' self-interest, organizers build action with the goal of getting a reaction from folks. They want folks to move. They want folks to speak out. Through each action, what happens morally, the universe bends a little closer to justice. So we hope. So in the Jewish community, in this sense, Queen Esther clearly has the most power to change the king's heart. She has access to organized money because she's so close to power. And also she can create change. She can organize the people in the king's palace. She can organize the court. Mordecai has a relationship with Esther, and he asks her to leverage her relationship with the king to save the lives of her people. Has anyone been in a place where they had to be the one to leverage the situation? Yeah. Anyone who goes in to see the king without invitation will be killed. She was scared. She was fearful for her life. It is not an interest to approach the king. She warned her uncle. Mordecai doesn't accept that. He pushed. And I find myself pushing quite often. I think about going to the office of an LGBTQ elected official, or a Black official, or a leader in the community who doesn't want to move. Sometimes you have to leverage a little. You have to remind them their close connection and their alignment with community. As Mordecai identifies what is really at stake, up to this point, Esther, and we didn't get to this, but Esther did not tell anyone that she was Jewish. It was a secret. And at this point, she's on the line like, I have to come out the closet in a sense. I have to reveal exactly who I am. Eventually, Esther, she accepts that she is Jewish, and she also understands what's at stake for her people and the people that she loves. Still, this is not something that she can pull off by herself. She has to also organize the folks in the king's court. So she had to work with people who were not Jewish and help them understand also what was at stake for them if the annihilation of Jewish folks actually happened. She calls for community support. She asks them to settle themselves and to get right spiritually and to fast for 3 days and for 3 nights. And I don't know about you, I'm sure some of the leaders in the room know how hard it is to get folks to do things that they might not want to do. And I can imagine some folks pushing back on not wanting to fast for 3 whole days and 3 whole nights. It was pretty difficult to get people to lay outside for 7 whole days and 7 whole nights, where we had to have a rotation. Folks who were not even from the Hartford community came out and slept outside. So Esther needs the support of many people. She might have needed an organization to come through and not just people. And as the story continues, Esther goes and confronts the king and corners Haman. She corners Haman. And how scary that might have been for Esther as a woman, as a queen, to first reveal herself, to come out her closet, and then to confront men who were in power, who had money, who had the dollars behind their words. And she has the power. Understand, she has the power to reverse this decree. So with all the organizing of Mordecai, with the strength and the power of Esther, it was reversed. And she actually saves her people. She saves the Jews. So let's return to the question. What will you do How will you respond? Will you be an activist in the street calling attention to injustice? Will you scream through the street, love is love, Black lives matter, everyone belongs here, not one more deportation, let the next person go, let them free? Or will you be a silent bystander in the empire? Will you let them take another one of our sisters, brothers, or siblings? Will you let that youth go by without participating in sports this year? Will you let another trans woman of color be killed and murdered in the streets? What will you do? Will you be a bystander or will you move? How is God calling you to act in the community? Thank you.